Welcome to the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, I'm Fawn Germer.
I'm Michelle Brigman.
And this is the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast. Today, our guest is Maureen McGurl, who is a corporate superstar in many ways, an HR pioneer, and actually is the person that I wanted to be the first guest on our podcast. Because when Michelle and I were brainstorming what we wanted to do, I thought it would be great to start with our mentors. And Maureen has always been a great mentor to me since I met her, and how we met is a pretty good story, because I was working on a book for the Network of Executive Women, and I was trying to get interviews with, I think we ended up with 52 just super women. And one of them was this woman, Eileen Scott, who was the CEO of Pathmark, which was a Fortune 500 company. So she's one of the big Fortune 500 CEO women, one of the first. And I saw her at an event, and I asked her if we would be able to do the interview, and she goes, "I will only be in your book if you talk to Maureen McGurl because she's my mentor." And I thought, well, that's kind of bold, telling me who I have to interview. But once I met Maureen, it began a conversation that has lasted for about 15 years. And she has been there for me as such a great support, and she does this for so many women, and I'm assuming men too, but because she's passionate about helping others to be successful. And I've watched her go from industry and making different life changes, and she always has a viable business where she's always killing it. So I'm so happy to share her with you. She means the world to me, and I can tell you that by the time we're done, she's going to tell you a few things that may change your own path. So, Maureen, welcome.
Well, thank you, Fawn. So great to be here. Great to see you, Michelle, too.
I'm so glad to meet you.
Yeah. And if you can, just start with your story about how you got into industry, how you made it to the very top, and you've had such huge positions, and how you did that while also paving the way for other women.
Okay, so I guess I have to go back more than 30 years. I hate to say that, but I was a trailblazer. And my first corporate job was with Pathmark, therefore Eileen Scott. She happened to be on one of my top talent lists. So that's how Eileen and I became so close. But my job at Pathmark, I ended up as the VP of HR because of a particular set of circumstances that I thought it'd be interesting to share. I was assigned to a project. It was a big technology project. And at a point in time, 4 weeks from when we were supposed to implement this system, we had a vote on whether we should do it or not. And the president of the company, the CEO, others were in the room. And amongst all the folks, I was like 26 years old at the time, the vote went down. Should we or shouldn't we? I was the only dissenting vote. I said, nope, it isn't ready. It's going to cost us a fortune. We're going to run it. We won't be able to do it well. We won't be able to do it cost efficiently. And what did I know? But as a result of that, I was proven right. And 2 years later, I became the VP of HR for Pathmark, a $5 billion company at the time. And I was one of amongst 30 executives in the company. So the first woman. And it was an interesting and fascinating job, loved every second of it. And it was a great opportunity to really pioneer and help other women to make it in our world. So I would share with you two other stories because I think they're helpful when you think about careers and how you make impact and change and hopefully flourish in a job. And the first story that I would tell you about is a letter my father sent me. And I fun. In fact, I think it's in one of your books. But my dad wrote me a letter maybe a month after getting promoted, and he said to me, you're the only woman amongst all these men, and you're going to need to do something that demonstrates competence so that they're going to listen to you and you can have impact. And you need to know my dad wasn't a college grad, but really bright guy and intuitive. So I decided that I would develop a relationship with this merchandising guy. Zip Limmerman was his name. He was a cigar smoking 50-some-year-old man. And I decided, okay, what can we do to help him? And we actually did an organization design project. We helped him redesign his whole organization. It really went off very well. And before we knew it, myself, my whole team, we were getting requests to do that kind of work for the rest of the organization. So it had impact, and we were able to actually have influence in the organization as a result of it. So I would call that out as something that it just goes to show that if you can develop relationships and have impact, it's enormously helpful with a career. And then maybe the third thing that I would call out that I found interesting and was around this whole issue of changing an organization. And this was an organization that was really open to people of color, to women, and really advancing and promoting them. But we would always say language makes a difference. And in the company, all the managers were he. But I knew that they knew the difference because the customers were she. And we wanted to change how we thought about that because we wanted more women in management. We wanted to open that up. And all of us, we would have a sense of humor about it. And we, as men, would just say, he this, he that. We would say, he or she. I know you know the difference. He's the manager. She's the customer. Let's make them both the customer and the manager. And we actually accomplished that. And in an organization with, 30,000 people, we were able to change the language. But one day, one of the executives said to me, hey, listen, you need to get on the bandwagon too. He said, I said, well, what do I do? What do I need to do different? He said, you have to change your name. It can't be McGurl. It has to be McPerson. Anyway, so from that day on, I used McPerson in some meetings, and we found it fun just to have something else to laugh about. But
it's interesting how language changed an attitude, and how you kind of had a sing-song way when they just say he to kind of make it humorous, right?
Right. That's right.
That's what I was going to say. The importance of humor is an uncomfortable situation because you're causing, you're expecting people to change behaviors, and they may think it's like, okay, you're being dramatic. I don't really buy into this, especially then. And the fact that you used humor to do it, I think is incredibly powerful lesson. You go with a lot of stuff with a smile on your face and a laugh.
You know what? Especially when you're in those kind of roles where there's a lot of issues to confront, difficult conversations to have, the extent to which you have humor rather than a hammer, it really works. Really works.
And that one, what was it? He or she, right?
He or she, yes.
How did you pull that off without them starting to roll their eyes because you were going to be the one that was always trying to remind them about the importance of women, both in the ranks and in the field that they were working with?
I was really lucky. This was an organization that really believed in opening its ranks to everyone. And I think that if we didn't have credibility in the organization, we couldn't have pulled off the change in language and the change in behaviors that opened up our ranks to everyone. So, and by the way, we ran very sophisticated selection systems and stuff. But what we did is where our organization required, let's say a store manager, it required you have been an assistant store manager to be an assistant. You had to be a grocery manager. Well, who were the grocery managers? They were all men. So your pool was all men. So by creating even more jobs that were a route to that job, we opened it up. And by engaging a lot of the men as our real partners in it, those men used the language. So the president used he or she. Well, he starts to use he or she, and of course our language today needs to be different, but back then that was by him doing it and by others in the executive ranks doing it, we had partners. And so therefore the language change came easier.
Gosh, that's a curious question. So what would the language change be right now?
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, today when it's to open up to all of these avenues, I know that when I go to write something today, I write in the plural rather than really using the singular so that I don't have to say his or her, or I can say their. So that's the way I've found to deal with it, because people have their own pronouns today. And how do you deal with communications? For me, it's to go to the plural, but I'm sure others have different answers today.
I want to go back to your very first story where you were the single vote.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, because you were young, you were surrounded by a large group of men, right? You were surrounded by men. You were the only. What gave you the confidence to actually speak truthfully around what you felt? Because that would be a tough situation. That's kind of the go along to get along is what most people would do. So I would love for you to elaborate a little bit more on building confidence to be that lone voice and no one backing you up.
And wait, and let me come in here, because this was what I was going to bring up. I think if we put the timeline of when you were doing that at Pathmark next to my own timeline, remember I famously had a boss hole who did not want me advocating for women and minorities. And it was really a very punitive, difficult moment for me to bring my quote unquote agenda into the workplace. Some people are going to have a receptive group like you did, but some are, it's going to be punitive. So it's not only confidence, but it's reading the room, and then how do you deal with it? So put all that together if you can, and tell us, how do you tell people to make change?
Yeah. Well, in this case, I think the fact that I was the user representative on the project and I had a very strong voice. And, I think the fact that I had a degree in mathematics helped me a lot, because it gave me a credibility to be a good analytic thinker. And so that gave me some credibility with the teams that I worked with. And I just had built up a lot of credibility with the work teams that we had 50 people on this project. It was a huge project. And I had a voice with them and the way that system was designed. And I also, when I communicated that I didn't believe that it was ready, I also told them what I thought we needed to do to make it ready. And
That's a great point. That's a great point. Just the fact that you can't raise a problem without having at least idea around how to present with the complementary solution.
So in that meeting, the man who ran IT at the time just said, okay, I'm gonna spend a week with her and I'm gonna understand whether she's right or she's wrong about it. And after a week, they agreed we needed to extend the project. And myself and another resource designed what would be our answer to the issue that we had, because we had 30 collective bargaining agreements at the time and needed to manage a zillion differences and wanted to do it efficiently. So I think the fact that I had a voice that had effect, and we had the makings of a solution, we just needed to take the time to do it, caused us to make that change and radically improve what was going to be delivered to the organization.
So how would you have mentored me? in a completely different situation, or another woman who's trying to make change, doing the right thing, maybe very confident. I think I was. But sometimes you're trying to make change and it blows up on you. So how do you tell people how to navigate and figure out if they should charge forward?
Well, I think it's about, a lot of it is about developing a relationship with the right people. And, if you're dealing with someone who is so set in their ways, the question in my mind is, are there other people who could help influence that situation? Could help them to see it in a different way.
Wow. Yeah.
And have impact on them. Because sometimes our voice isn't sufficient, but if you bring to bear other voices as well, then it's a collective of people who are influencing it and not just a single person. Sometimes our voice alone is perfectly fine, but sometimes we need to engage others.
Maureen, I think that's another great point. I know a practice, just to build on this a little bit, a practice that I use, particularly going back to what you're talking about, and that's influence and credibility. A practice I use as soon as I can deliver something valuable to my stakeholder or my client is asking them to please share it with their peer group. Because to the point that you just made, I can talk about the great work that my team does all day long, but whenever someone that has more credibility and influence can speak to their peer group, that is who is trusted. That is who is going to help pave the way. And I think that is a great technique for others to use as they're trying to grow their span of influence.
Yeah, if you think about my second story about my father saying, find someone of influence in the organization, and the most unlikely partner in the world you could think of for me at the time was Zip Limmerman. I mean, we were as different as night and day. But once he said, this is a credible person with credible work for the organization, it all opened up.
Yep. And it doesn't always have to be the most senior title that is the influence. And I think that's another takeaway is sometimes you can have someone junior, middle, who actually the organization they have a ton of influence. And so don't
absolutely
neglect noticing who people listen to.
Right. So in change management theory, you would look for people across the spectrum to help you in navigating change, right? And it's really important to have people across the spectrum to do it, right?
So you left Pathmark to go to SuperValue in an even bigger job.
I actually left to go to Olston first. Olston, which was a home health care and temporary staffing company, about a $5 billion company. It was global. So I went there first and spent a few years until we sold the business. That was a fun experience, very different. It was a sales organization versus, the supermarket industry.
Did you know you were going in to help with the sale, or did you go in with other expectations?
I went in with that expectation that we would be a key cog in the wheel because they were in the human resource business in many ways. And what I didn't know is that the salespeople would actually go out and sell things they didn't have, and then come and make sure that we could deliver on it for them. So I learned that pretty quickly.
And then you went. It wasn't.
And then I went to Stop and Shop, Hold USA. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
So yeah, I would have the wrong person. That should have been Janelle if we were talking about SuperValue. But so you Stop Shop. So then, right. Yeah. So you took another thing on, and I think what's always interesting is you always are chasing the bigger challenge, and that at the same time you've had a meaningful, powerful connection with your husband, your family, to where it's not even about balance. You love to work, but you love your family too. So how did all of that play in your life?
Well, Mark has had 11 operations. And I think at my time at Stop and Shop, he had open heart surgery maybe a year and a half after I got there. and then 2 other operations. So I was at Stop and Shop for 5.5 years. And through some of the most tumultuous times that the company went through it, my first 3 months on board, the organization nearly went bankrupt because one of the sister businesses had overstated earnings by $500 million. So it threw the organization into, a kind of tailspin. And there were significant changes that we had to manage to the business. So at the same time, my husband was not well. And, but we managed through all of that. I have a really good family and a strong family, and we made sure that the right time was being spent with everyone. And, but at the end of 5.5 years, it was time to come home, and it was time to come back to New York. And it was at that point I really said, okay, this has been 30 years of 3 major corporations driving change in 3 major corporations. And what's the next stage of life? What's that going to be? And I wanted to be able to be at home more and be here for Mark more. And so therefore I started my consulting business, and
Killed it.
And I coach, and I'm a fractional CHRO at this point. So a lot of variety, but with good time for my family as well. My grandkids, I have 6 grandkids, and you want to have time for all of them. We had time for them growing up. We developed really meaningful relationships. They stayed with us on weekends, and we did the things that allow the strong connections to be made, and we're as close with our grandkids as you could ever want to be. And that's really important to us. So we do the things that allow us to make that happen.
Well, Maureen, when she's talking about this, what happened with Mark, I mean, Maureen's husband is larger than life. He is he's a force like she is. And yet I think there might be some wisdom also in how to manage a career when your personal life is calling on you to deliver everything you've got. So how did you do all
That's
that?
exactly where I wanted to go. Like that 5-year period, you were doing things that's wisdom we can give our listeners, because they're in this. So I'd love to hear more of what worked for you.
It said that it takes a village. And I will share with you what I said to my stepdaughter, who has a very large job and with lots of things to take care of. It takes the village, and create the village for yourself. You've got to find people who can shore things up as you try to deal with all of it. And sometimes you can't deal with all of it. Sometimes there's something that gives, right? So in my case, my consulting practice gives me the flexibility to do things around a schedule that fits me. And, but I think it's really important that there be additional family. So for example, coming off of one of the operations, and by the way, Mark is he is the healthiest unhealthy person.
Right.
Because you might get a different image from the conversation, but he's the healthiest unhealthy person. So he's got this incredible attitude. And by the way, that helps, right? If the person that is struggling a bit with health has a great attitude, that helps. But developing and getting my sister, who was a nurse, came the first week. I spent it with my husband. Then my sister spent the second week. And then his sister came with the nurse ratchet hat on and the bag, and came the third week to help. So reaching out in that case to say, you know what, I need some help here. There's like everything is coming together at the same time. Can you help me with this? People will step up to the plate and help. And sometimes it's other executives that you're working with who will step up to the plate and help. It's your staff who will step up to the plate. And I'm dealing with someone who's got a very serious illness of a spouse. And I'm saying to them, use your staff in more concrete ways. take it as an opportunity to build some experience for them so that you're helped to give time where you need to dedicate more time. So all of us have to dedicate different amounts of time at different points in time, shore ourselves up and get the help that we need, to either from our own staffs at work or other people we work with or family members. And if you don't have family, there's friends who are in similar situations. If I can think of a situation where, you've got kids who have got to get picked up from school 5 days a week. Well, one parent does it one day and 4 other parents do it another day, right? So you're splitting it. So belonging to networks is really, really critical, right? The right network for the right reason can be very helpful.
So
I don't know if that answers the question, but
no, it does. It gives them a path. So we want to get some of the hard-won wisdom. You got so many topics you're so strong on. You've been in so many of my books. One thing I want to get out of you is how you advise people to negotiate for opportunities and jobs. So how do people make the case to get more? And verbiage is important too.
For sure. So the first thing I would say about, negotiating for a job is just make sure it's the right job, right? So when we're thinking about a job, being more planful, I talk about managing your career versus it managing you. It's very easy to get sucked into the next opportunity, or something comes in front of you and you take that, rather than being planful about it and saying, what's really important to me in life? What do I want? What are the right industries for me? What are the right companies for me? So I think it's important to frame all of that first before you're actually in that job negotiation. And having thought that through, I think you have a better feel for the kinds of questions you might want to be asking because remember, an interview is a two-way street. Someone is interviewing you to determine if you're right for the job they have. You have an opportunity to see them, to talk to them, to ask questions about whether this is the right place for me. And once you've determined that it is, and that person has, they're making an offer, I think it's then thinking about, well, what's this offer? What does it look like? And do I understand it in full? Because sometimes you just look at base pay and bonus, but in the case of executives, if there's equity that's involved, it's a big piece of the equation. And importantly, 401k and what that looks like, and other perks, and the culture of that organization, and how that's reflected in their policies and practices on paid time off and maternity or parental leave and all of those things is very important. So I say, make sure you know and understand what the package is. And coming into it, have some thoughts about what's really important to me. What do I want? And if you've thought about the job and the industry, et cetera, and how you market yourself, then you've thought about that as well. And you can match what this job offer looks like versus what I want to be, what I need or what I want. And I like to say to people, listen, love this offer. Thank you so much for it. And these are some things that are important to me about a job and the offer that's being given to me. These are elements that would really enhance this offer for me. Tell me what you can do. And, some people might want to take maybe a more aggressive tact with it. It's a matter of style. I'm just sharing from my perspective sometimes how the listener hears it is really important. So thinking about how I want to say I want more is really important. And just by saying, listen, I have a list of things that are really important to me as an individual. Can we talk about those things? Or I want to offer those things up and give you an opportunity to think about it.
Michelle, there's so many studies that talk about how women aren't quick to negotiate. And I have hoped that over the years that has changed, but I know it's a little still it's men. I did this one panel with all men, and I was interviewing, and this one guy says, yes, a woman takes the first offer, a man will always ask for more. So I thought, oh, I'm going to always ask for more. So do women need to get more comfortable asking?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And how do you get them comfortable with that?
And I want to add on to what she's saying, though, like, because you get asked now, well, where you answer with this sort of range, people answer with a range, and that range could just be way off base to what the position. So I think,
what do you mean?
well, so you walk in thinking my range for what I would work for is X, but they're walking in going, the position would pay this range, and you may be pretty disconnected.
That's a great question. So do you just drop out right then and there, or do you say, you just keep moving forward, hoping you're going to bump it up?
Well, I could tell you that I would oftentimes say to a search person, listen, let's talk about the range the job is in, because if the job isn't in the right range, there's really no sense having a conversation. So, if you want 100,000, but they're in 50,000 range, this isn't a match made in heaven, and it'll never be made in heaven. So some companies will say, listen, my range is 100 to 125, but for the right person, I'd be willing to go more. So then you have to say, well, is it worth my time to invest here? Because they might be willing to go more.
What do you do whenever the company, though, is asking you the candidate first for the range versus them offering it up? How do you respond to that as the candidate?
It's interesting. I'm going through a job search right now with somebody else. We're looking to hire someone for the company that I am a fractional CHR for. And the recruiter does ask, what's the range? But she's also saying that the company's range is this, but it may be willing to do more for the right person. So we're always asking the range, because you can't ask, well,
somebody's got to say a number.
Right? Somebody's
to know how to move forward, right?
A lot of companies publish their ranges. So they will publish something that says this is my minimum for the job, and this is my midpoint for the job. And that's the range that I'm in for this position, but I may go more.
See, if somebody were to ask me for a range, and I have to negotiate all the time as a speaker. So I know I don't want to give the first number, because it may be too low and then I'm going to lose money, and it may be too high and I won't get the job. And so that as soon as they give me a range, I know that the highest number they give is going to be the basement of where we're starting. But I don't know that it works like that in jobs.
I think that it's fair to say, I want to be paid a wage that's fair in the workplace, that's fair for this job. And as we progress here, I'll know and understand that better. But you could put a range up. Listen, if you're making, 100,000 now, and you want to be making 120 to 140, and you might say, I want to be making 120 to 140, and it will depend upon the scope of this job as I understand it better. And it also will be dependent on internal equity and what's fair in your workplace. And if you have that kind of conversation, there's flexibility without committing yourself to, I want 125, I'm only going to come for 125, even though maybe you should pay me 140.
So I love this conversation, and I love it with I'm considering coming to work at X company. But so often it's the employee is at the company already, and they get the shoulder tap of, here, we want to give you more responsibility. You're doing such a great job. But guess what? It's lateral and there's no budget. And I know so many people who have been stuck in that land of, great, they're growing skill set, they're getting exposure to other sides of the company, but you know what? Their paycheck isn't changing.
That's a great question.
How do you protect yourself from, the balance of, yes, sometimes lateral makes sense, right? That's the best move for you, but where you're not giving away too much of yourself and not getting anything back in return.
Well, if you're moving laterally, you need to be getting something for yourself. And that's the experience of that job, where it will add to your portfolio of skills and experiences that make you more valuable. even though it was lateral at the time. And I think that people should have like a timeline on it for themselves that says, listen, went into this job lateral, but we really need to be talking about a salary increase for me to represent the level of skill that I've developed now, the experiences I've had, and what I'm worth to the organization. And that can be, these conversations don't need to be threatening. And I think sometimes people think, oh, it's controversial or it's threatening, where it can be, listen, at this point in time, I really want us to be considering a salary increase for me. I think I'm warranted because I've contributed X, Y, and Z. And this is the number that I'm looking for. What's the worst they can do?
That's
say no.
really important, because not only if you're moved into something lateral, but what if you're in the same job and they keep dumping more on you? So if your duties, you're doing the work of 1.5 or 2 people or 3 people, how do you then say, pay me?
Well, I think there's a number of ways to approach that, Fawn. I tend to think about it a little differently. As they're asking you to do more stuff, I think that sometimes you just need to say, hey, listen, the basket's full. I can't deal with any more coming towards me. And I wouldn't feel negative about it. I would be more positive about it. They're asking you to do it because they think you can do it. But on the other hand, you shouldn't be asked to do more than what's reasonable, right? So I think when the basket's full and you can't do any more, you need to be saying that. We need to feel more comfortable that in a non-controversial way, but in an explicit way, we say, listen, we've reached the limits of what's capable of a single human being in this job. And if we're not controversial about it, we're just factual about it, I think it rings better. It rings more true. It's easier to deal with.
It's important too, because the more they see you can do, the more they want to get the most that they can get. So they'll keep trying.
Yeah. And by the way, so when's my next promotion? Right. So we can have the conversation about, listen, I think we need to put more money on the table for what I'm doing, but where's my next career opportunity? And by the way, it may not be there. It may not be there. And if it isn't there, then if I'm managing my career versus it managing me, I will begin to look for my next opportunity. In this market, it's out there. But it's also out there for you to get something from your current companies because they have an incentive to keep the good people that they have.
This is all so valuable. I think another thing that would really be helpful to listeners is style. And Maureen, you've got such amazing presence that is born out of authenticity. You've got a style. You don't fit any, uptight corporate mold. You come into the room, people know you're there because you're who you are on a great level. And if you can tell people what they should be doing in terms of presenting themselves. And I'm going to talk about this because when I did my last book on how to have a sustainable career, one of the things we see with people as they hit middle age, and I write about this, is they start looking frumpy. And that is not how you want to be presenting yourself if you're viable. So how should we be projecting ourselves so that we are most effective in getting opportunities and seen as relevant?
How people show up, I think, is often a matter of competence and confidence. And, people who have both tend to have, a little bit of a swagger. People can tell that, they're in an important job, whatever. So I do think that competence and confidence is really important, and that delivers presence. And all of us, we have to have competence. We have to stay up to date. You and I have talked about this a zillion times, right? You have to stay up to date with what's going on in this world and be knowledgeable. And make sure that you're reading and having conversations and being mentored by, young folks around different. My grandkids mentor me about I can't tell you how many things. So I think those kinds of things are important.
But also your physical appearance is critical and more critical, far more critical for a woman than a man. Far more.
That's true. That's absolutely true. And I always say being fresh is important. Fresh. So not
Wow.
you fresh is just, you've got your hairstyle is working, your makeup is working, nothing too extreme, and you're dressed for success. And dress for success could be anything. It could be a pair of jeans and a jacket, right? So it much depends upon the industry, the companies that you want to be working with, the people you want to be working with. What's their style and what's the culture of that permeates the air, and are you fitting into that? And if you don't, where do you fit? But I think this whole idea of, as we get older, it's really important to take care of ourselves mentally, physically, and emotionally. And whether there's lots of solutions to that and things we ought to be doing. But not letting yourself get frumpy is really important. I hope people don't react to that, but that's just the truth.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll hold that because I wrote a book on this. It is the truth, and these words are coming out from me, a woman who's had a lifelong weight problem, right, up and down and up and down, and I know that I feel better when my weight is in check, but I also know the way I'm received is better, and I hate telling you all this because it makes you uncomfortable, but it is one thing. You can have a weight problem, you can be overweight and be fit at the same time. And so you can have good clothing, you can look great. So it's just, you got to just give a little bit of time to your image.
Yeah, and by the way, people, I always see the good, right? It's just who I am. And for me, it doesn't matter what our weight is, because I've struggled with weight as well. I mean, fortunately, I've been able to generally keep it down, but we all, I shouldn't say we all, some people are very lucky and don't struggle at all. But I think it's all in then how you package yourself, because it's being frumpy doesn't correlate with being heavier. It correlates with not putting yourself together in the best way for you. What makes you look and feel good about yourself? And you'll bring, just your attitude and the smile on your face or whatever will bring joy to people and want to be aligned with you. If you have, my glass is half full, not half empty all the time. It's oftentimes more about attitude, I think, than anything else.
People feel better when they leave an interaction with you. And if your answer is anything other than yes, then you probably want to do some soul searching there.
Yeah.
Maureen, you spent a ton of time. I mean, you're an expert in HR. And we've had a lot of conversations on this podcast about the relationship between the employees and HR. Can you trust your HR department if there's something that is happening and you need their support? Are they on your side? Are they on the company side? I'd love your thoughts, having spun a career around this entire place.
Yeah. So I would say, I can speak to the companies that I worked with. And I would say to you that we would, in our HR teams, we would say, we represent you and we represent the company. And when we speak to you, we are balancing you and the company. And if there are harassment issues, discrimination issues, whatever, then it's all about the employee and being sure that you're representing them appropriately and doing the fact finding, but doing the fact finding with regard to that manager as well. You have to be sure you got the right story, you did the right investigating, you did the right fact finding, that you understand the whole picture, not a piece of the picture. And in dealing with a lot of the issues today, people sometimes flip 180 degrees. So they go from one extreme to another extreme, when oftentimes moving 90 degrees would be much better. Not every case of harassment or sexual harassment comes to the level of termination. There's different levels of it. And you need to understand what level was represented in this particular issue. So, for example, if someone is asking someone for a date, that's not harassment, right? That's normal stuff, and the person should just say, I'm not interested. When it gets to the fifth time or the second time or the third time or whatever, it becomes an issue. The conversation should happen. People don't get terminated for that. They get warnings for that, so that they can then realize the seriousness of what they're dealing with. And, or if it's a case of sexual harassment where that person's gone beyond the pale here, that's cause for termination. So I tend to think of these things as running the gamut from counseling to termination, and what's the right action to take. And any human resource department worth its salt is representing both the individual and the company. And they can represent both well if they're fair, honest, respectful. If those are the general principles by which they run their function, then they will do what's right for the individual. And in the end, it will be right for the business.
I think it's a critical point for the listener. You have to really understand the values of the company to make a decision on how to work with, disclose, collaborate with your HR department, because it will matter.
It will matter. I tend to be more trustworthy of people and what they do. But if the company didn't have a good reputation for it, and I didn't see it represented, I may be, distrustful.
Think twice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What an incredible conversation that we've had today. Like, the time has flown by. And there's so much here and so much great advice. And I thank you for that. There's a couple of things that I'd recap and say that really stood out to me. I am going back to your job and career choice. I thought it was just such a really great point that you made in terms of don't live reactively when it comes to your career. Always be thinking about, where do you want to go? Because if you know where you are going, then you will know which opportunities to say yes to, which ones you need to walk away from, and how to negotiate to make sure they're aligned. So just incredibly powerful advice there, because I think so many of us live in this reactive place where, oh, I'm thrilled because I was approached for something and I'm quick to say yes. And then you wonder why you absolutely hate it, because you don't know where you're going. But there was so much also packed in really to the beginning of the conversation. And I think the big takeaway is your goal in a career is all about credibility. And how do you become credible? And you gave just some fantastic tips. So I heard demonstrate competence quickly. Make sure you are, again, working with someone of influence and impact to show and be that advocate for you, because that's where people are going to go, there's something going on over there. This is a person to know, and they're much more likely to then work with you. And therefore you're able to have, again, a bigger, more impactful results within the company and get more yeses than nos, which I think, again, a lot of our listeners may struggle with, getting too many no's. And then finally, no matter what it is, if it's talking about a new opportunity, if it's about working with your stakeholders, you really gave examples of always starting from a place of positive, like let's start from a positive place. And if I'm asking for more, I'm saying, thank you for the generosity. These are the things I value. This would make this even better. Whether you're talking to your stakeholder and your ally, thank you for, giving me the opportunity to work on this project with you. I look forward to you helping, share the word that the work my department is doing to help us get more results and help us be able to help the department. I think that's a really good takeaway for our listeners too. So I just say thank you tremendously. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to spend this time with you.
You're welcome. It's been a joy.
I knew you'd kill it. Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you for joining the Hard Won Wisdom podcast with best-selling author Von Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Join us weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network. Visit hardwonwisdom.com for more on this podcast and for links to Fawn and Michelle's web pages and social media. Also, be sure to rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll see you next week.